So first of all, welcome to Lexington and welcome to another version of the dark side. I'm a medical imaging person now, so I started my career as a biomed. And how did you end up getting into IT? Well, that will be an interesting travel, but a lot of this presentation is understanding when you're dealing with IT challenges, also how to deal with IT people, and basically how to keep yourself out of trouble sometimes in that situation. So there's who I am. There's what I do now. I'm manager of projects and medical imaging services for Wellstar Health System in Marietta, Georgia. So, people see my shirt, they go, what's a Wellstar? I get that. I live in Chattanooga, so I get that all the time. I'm 95 miles away from where I work. So there's a little bit about Wellstar. We're pretty big. We basically cut the state of Georgia in half east to west currently now. So we go essentially from around Columbus, Georgia, completely across to a little place called Augusta, which kind of people like hitting golf balls around there. Recently, our claim to fame is it got hit by a hurricane. So some of the demographics, we've got 21 imaging centers. I've got a lot of MRIs. One guy came to, started Wellstar at one point and said, how many CTs do you have? I said, define where? He said, right here on your main campus. And I gave him a number. It was like 17. And he goes, you don't have 17. I said, oh yeah, I do. I started naming them. Up he goes, oh my God, you do. So second busiest emergency room in Georgia. We have a 4-story freestanding 100-bed emergency room. And on any given day, we're at capacity, plus probably 50 waiting in the waiting room. So, you never fail until you stop trying. The thing is, like, when you're doing our career, the biggest thing is you never know anything, you never know everything. And I always say that the moment I think I know everything is the moment I need to leave, because that's when and you never fail until you stop trying. If you fold in the deck of cards, I was talking to somebody right before you guys got in here about why I am what I am. So I get up in the morning, I don't have a job. I have since 1984 when I became an intern at the Detroit Medical Center. I realized I had a purpose. When I joined Michigan in 1985, I realized people rely on me to do what I do. I don't get up in the morning and go, I'm just doing some mundane job. I'm doing something that impacts other people's lives. So a little bit of my background there. There's where I came from. So I'm getting ready to dump these dates because I've had people go like, I wasn't even born in 1985. So I'm gonna have to go forward and get rid of those. Adapting to surprises. So let's start with as we're talking about this. Everyone remembers the COVID pandemic. What? Yeah, this became surprises. This became, I'll be honest with you, and I'm apolitical, I'll be honest. In my profession, I don't care if you're a Republican, a Democrat, a man, a woman, what color you are. When I got called when I was a member of trauma teams and stuff like that, respond to trauma bay 3. I had no idea except for except for potentially what the issue was. I didn't care what the person was. So during the pandemic, a lot of things that happened during that is it turned our whole profession upside down, to be honest. Did any of you work through the whole pandemic? Yep. So, this was totally uncharted ground for everybody. Some of the things, adapting to surprises. If you're from around Metro Atlanta, we had a major level 1 trauma center called Atlanta Medical Center. We were basically, anyone familiar with level 1 trauma centers? You know how much money you make running a level 1 trauma center? There you go. 0. In fact, you're usually the other way. I've spent a lot of my career started in trauma centers. What happens is that hospital ended up getting shut down because of basically, it was non-sustainable to our business, Wellstar. We couldn't there was, like when I worked at Erlanger, we would get a stipend every year from the federal government, the state of Tennessee, to help us stay open. Because I always made the joke, hi, my name's Greg, I'm from Erlanger, and I'm broke. Seriously, because we didn't have any money. And that ended up, that was a surprise that happened like within 120 days, because we had one minor hospital that was attached to it shut down, and we were keeping the big one going, and we were literally doing new equipment installs 2 weeks before we got the notification that said, we have to shut down this hospital. And so, things like that throw you into a whole nother world. Then guess what? A few years later, now we've acquired Augusta. Now we've got a whole bunch of new hospitals. So I went from, up and down, down 2, up 3. So, expansions of service lines. In my biomed world, imaging, we're pretty straightforward. If you're in biomed, how many times is your job metamorphosized? If you started back when I did in 1985, how much IT stuff did you do? Probably, a little bit of networking. Anyone remember, I'm going to use an acronym. You might know this, SDN. There you go. So I heard Phil. No, but it wasn't called Philips back in the day. Who was it? There you go, Hewlett Packard. Yeah, and I will agree with you. That was probably the most rock solid devices I've ever dealt with in my career was the HP SDN network and some of those old monitors. They were built, if technology hadn't, and if everything hadn't kept metamorphosizing, those things would still be running today. So we're talking about expansions of service line, things to ponder. One of the things that is, now when I started this, everybody, I got 2 cell phones here. Everybody's got a cell phone. Now the expectation even is, the bring your own device thing has become, nurses, everybody has their own, it's an expectation almost of employment. You bring your own device in. Whether you love it or hate it, it's still, you still end up with a lot of issues. And also too, as we're talking about bring your own, the dangers of this, who regulates the devices you have? Nobody. It's your device. So if you go out and your shop, whatever your device, your laptop or whatever is on, can bring all sorts of havoc, and carry malware. Device mobility, more and more, everyone now knows what the WOW is. We won't use its old acronym because we got in trouble for that. So, yeah, everybody did. And I couldn't figure out how that happened, but we'll leave that where it is. So, we've got these rolling computer stations everywhere. The biggest thing we have right now is data breaches. It's, like I said, I'm using some of this. This is common internet stuff that comes off. I would say probably the number that you're seeing right there is probably actually in reality much higher, because I think a lot of people don't report exactly how much, everyone remembers CloudStrike, when we had that software, it wasn't even a data breach, it was a patch that was put out by our own vendor that crashed everybody through the whole country. So it wasn't even a breach, but how many millions of dollars did that, it shut down Atlanta airport, shut down Delta. 95% of cybersecurity breaches, we wouldn't call that a breach, that was a bad patch. It's shut down, I can think of just in our hospital, we had 3 days where we were still bringing up different, systems were still acting up because of that. And, 43% of all breaches are insider threats, either intentional or unintentional. And as we're going through some of the stuff, like one of the things we'll talk about later on was we had a device that came into one of my prior lives. It came out of Israel as a wonderful stroke machine called the BrainsGate. And what happened was When they were installing it, they said, hey, we got this all set up. We can just jump on your network. And we said, no, we don't really want you on our, they said, we're not going to, there's nothing on our system that's going to hurt you. I said, we're not worried about you hurting us. We're worried about us hurting you because you had no safeguards. They had no basically antivirus on the system. And this was a wonderful stroke system. And, so you have to look at is when some of the stuff comes in, some of the, I can think of thumb drives. We had a doctor who brought in a thumb drive and he basically started taking out our cath lab systems. We caught it when they got the first system. But as we go on, was that threat malicious? No. What is one thing that's common with medical people? If they go out to a conference like this over here and they get a bunch of thumb drives, they will be using the same thumb drive that's unencrypted for how many years? Until it doesn't work anymore. So what happens is, and they're not only using it for patient data, they're probably using it for whatever they have on their laptop. So that's the most dangerous thing you have going around. How many people have seen, back in the day, somebody plugging in their cell phone to the central station because it has an unused USB port and they're charging up their cell phone, not thinking that this isn't a wall charger I'm plugged into. This is a CPU that goes out to my network that has HIPAA data. So here's something that, to think about. PACS versus EMR. So when I started my current career, like at WellStar, I was basically integration specialist working on an Epic system. We're converting to an EMR called Epic. So what that's doing is it's basically taking all your vital signs, charting them, all your demographics of your patients, stuff like that, putting them into an archive. When you're talking about PACS, and this is where the differentiation we have, like right now, I'm an independent person. Medical imaging is not tied to biomed. We are owned by radiology. My department is. My VP is radiology. Biomed's VP is IT. So the PACS system, as we call it, let's say we take a picture. Where this goes to is it goes to our PAC, basically it's archived where doctors can see it, they can retrieve it, bring it to reading rooms. So there's, a difference when you're talking about this, because also what I want you to think about is when you're transmitting data, like simple, vital signs, the packet is pretty small. When all of a sudden you start throwing these MRI images and things like that into it, all of a sudden the package of data you're talking about is immense. When you're talking about a PACS system, this stuff, that's why you just can't send, I had to deal with this just recently, because I had, for a family member, run to another hospital to go get a CD to have sent to another hospital, hundreds of miles away because they didn't have compatible systems, because you just can't send those type of files through certain networks if you don't have the proper handshake. So our data in my world right now is huge compared to EMR stuff. Types of security, and we're talking, device security, physical security, limit access to a device or a system. Some of the stuff, when we're talking about this, which will get you in trouble. Lock a device to prevent removal, controlled access to areas, virtual security, documentation of operating systems. This has become, like right here, it's not only the software that's on the system. How many people have noticed you're getting recalls through, I call it cohort software? Your system's running this software that may be Windows based, but it's also it's using an application software that takes the data and puts it to a whole nother repository. So what happens is you're starting to get, it's not only thinking about what's on the machine, it's what the machine talks to. And I've had several instances of, our cardiology systems merge. We've had issues before where somebody will come up to us and say, hey, it's your system that's not transmitting, but you'll have all of a sudden, some cases I can think of one where we had a problem in one hospital 40 miles away, we had another problem with the same software in a different hospital. I said, well, it can't be device centric because they're physically separated networks. It's where all this data is talking to, which is now you're back to IT going like, okay, this isn't us that's a problem. We can do everything we can to check the ports, things like that, make sure they're active. It's that software that everything's using. So this is a whole, this is something that years and years ago we didn't even consider. Antivirus, the catches with antivirus. A lot of antivirus is great, but also too, antivirus can be very, can cause a lot of havoc because a lot of vendors will qualify their devices with certain antiviruses with them. I can use I can use one version A, hospital uses version B. If you push that antivirus out to me, we got some bad problems. Types of device, any camera used in the hospital. How many people know right now, cameras, got these two phones right here, they all have cameras in them. One of the best thing is, unfortunate thing we had, it wasn't a bad thing, but we used to have a kind of a quality thing where everybody in our hospital would take pictures of our teams doing things, post them online, and say, hey, here's what we're doing. Taking a picture of the camera phone. One of our nursing units took a picture, and back in the day we used to have, remember the whiteboards? We had everybody's patient name on it, the diagnosis, who the doctors were, and all that stuff. Well, they were sitting next to the board, and they were on click, click, and they, what they were presenting was great, but what they didn't realize in the background there, they had 12 patient names in the background that got propagated to everybody in the whole hospital. And everyone, and it's that simple, that it's, you don't think about it, but there's a lot of malicious people out there that, or I would say nosy people that want to know why their neighbor went in the hospital. Not for any reason that they care about them, but they just want to know why they went in the hospital. So that's why we have all these HIPAA, safeguards. When you get started in IT, as I crossed over, one of the things that, we started, and it actually was a comment, what got our group originally going back at Michigan years ago is our IT department was run by a bunch of, there are 3, I think, well, it's actually 4 biomeds who are all certified, who came from one hospital. And during a meeting we had, they said, there's more of us that are certified CBETs than there is of you. So we're actually, for lack of a better term, we're better than you are. Which spawned in 1993 a whole 6 of us going and becoming the first group independent of AMI to create this study group that all 6 of us got certified. So within 6 months, we got in that next meeting and said, hey, guess what? Now we outnumber you certified. So, and we started a program right after that at Eastern Michigan University that took our biomed degree as a 2+2, and we basically became computer engineers. And so as you're getting into this, I strongly encourage you, check your educational background, your experience. Do you have an interest in this? Like in my case, because I became a manager, I look for, who in my staff has experience and who genuinely wants to do IT stuff. And the first person I ever promoted to being we created a new job called a biomed specialist. That was IT, and I had one guy who was going to the University of Tennessee, getting every certification known to mankind. And he had as many certifications as anybody in IT. He had every, so when they have all their initials behind their name, he ended up having all those initials behind his name. He just didn't put them out there if he wanted to. So when I was looking to say, okay, we're getting more and more into IT at my prior employer, I had several guys who were interested, but I had one guy who was way up there. And so, when I started to go outside my lane, I said, I've got the ability to do this because I have a person I can rely on. And then I also have 2 other people who are behind him who are trying to learn this. Because if somebody doesn't have a genuine interest, are they going to do it? No. Current prior experience, certifications. Remember I said all those cute little initials? We have our initials in biomed, CBT, CHTM, CRES. I can't even name all the ones in Microsoft. I mean, it's become alphabet soup now. But you do realize that everybody respects those certifications. So when you're walking over to the IT world, you're A+ certified, that's your base one. Then as you keep going up, Net Plus, stuff like that, they realize that you are trying to learn it the right way. Understanding components of IT, software, antivirus, hardware, interfacing issues, network limitations, network components. This has changed. Network designs, topographies have changed infinitely since I started this back at Michigan. I mean, it's like, anybody remember Token Ring? Got a couple of people nodding their heads. The rest of you guys are going, what? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this stuff is changing daily. So, understanding when people, and I did an analogy to this in my prior presentation. I always realized when I was at Erlanger, on the right side of me, I always had a nurse sitting near me. And I could never figure out why nobody sat on the left. And I took detailed notes and stuff like that. And one day, one of my friends, she goes, didn't you ever wonder why we all sit on the right side of you? Everyone's fighting to sit on the right side of you. And I said, no. She said, we're reading your notes. We can't understand a word this IT person's saying. He's, talking, geek. Your notes are in plain English and you're talking plain English. So you're translating the geek for us because we have no idea, because he's talking to them. And it's amazing. And one of the things that really did also get me into my prior place, Erlanger, was we used to have, this was in my project management, we had a blueprint time, where we pick up our blueprints years ago. And I, changed this a little bit. They would hand the blueprints to a nurse. What is the job of a clinical person? To take care of the patient. What is our job? To take care of the infrastructure that takes care of the patient. So they used to give the nurse the blueprints and say, we want to know where your power outlets need to be, how many how many basically, network jacks you need to have for your system. And I remember one night I got a call, you had a habit of working late, and this nurse was in tears. She goes, I have to have this by first thing in the morning. I have no idea what I'm doing. They want me, and I said, you shouldn't. I said, any more than I should know your job. So I had to bring up the blueprints, went through them, marked all the network jacks where they had to be, where all the network jacks had to go to, where they should route to. Went back, talked to the person that gave the blueprints, and I said, this should never happen again because you're making people work out, you're setting a person up for failure because it's not the skill set that they should have any more than we may understand how to do some of the stuff, a lot of the stuff with a patient. I'm highly clinically trained, but I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse. But I can understand how this stuff's supposed to work on a patient, and I can explain it. IT people take a lot for granted and just assume that everybody, unfortunately, understands what they're talking about. They're talking in binary. Good luck. So remember, if you're in the first presentation, they're talking about digital x-rays, everything's ones and zeros. You know what? There were ones and zeros when I was in high school when this first came out. And you know what? There's still ones and zeros flowing all through computers. Outdated, unsupported software, as we're talking about right now, the biggest thing that is probably the price driver of us is outdated software, basically outdated components. Like as we're looking at the CPUs, we had a telemetry system years ago that the vendor, couldn't get basically any of the PC boxes. They were all gone. They didn't have any. We looked at it, and we found out that Newegg had the same CPUs and the same motherboards that they used for other systems. And we were a little bit ahead of the curve, so we realized that we could go out to Newegg with my credit card, and we bought every system. I think there's 10 of them left to keep our telemetry system going for another 2 years, because we were able to open the box up and say, which one has this motherboard? and we bought all the motherboards. Medical devices with an open access to the internet. This is a big problem. I don't know if any of you guys work with EEG. You know, this is basically, I call it, some of our clinical people will love sitting and going shopping, you know, on their systems. And they come up with sometimes clinical reasons for doing it, but a lot of stuff has way too much open access to the internet. Remember I said that unencrypted USB drives? That still is a problem. You know, it's less of a problem than it used to be. But at one point I still have my iron key. All of us in my profession were assigned a specific drive, you know, USB that we had that was in our name, that was encrypted. So, you know, good news is it's ours. The other part of the good news is if something happens to it, if it's lost, nobody can just shove it in something and take patient data. Because we did have one of those, actually one of those doctors, remember I said that cheap thumb drive? He dropped it right in the middle of 3rd Street in Chattanooga. And back in the day, 3rd Street was considered, you know, not really one of the upper class neighborhoods. So you dumped a bunch of patient data that somebody could easily, you know, just take and, you know, hey, I can take this off and sell it. And they were going to use that, you know, USB drive. Chances are, even if it wasn't malicious, they're like, man, I've got a USB drive, you know, and this is in a, you know, depressed economic area. It's a gold mine to them. Unauthorized software installations, pretty common. Social media. How many people are on Facebook? You know, I mean, it's, you know, that's one of the things that, like at my work, they basically, you know, have cut Facebook down on the computers. They like that you're on Facebook, you know, promoting, you know, LinkedIn, stuff like that. But, you know, there's a limit to how much you can even access that. Unsecured laptops. How many people have had a laptop walk out the door? You know, can say I've seen them do it. So the catch is now is everything now keeps getting smaller and smaller, where now we have ultrasound probes that plug into that phone. So your phone's become, in theory, you know, a medical device. It has data in it. So yeah, you know, there's a whole other thing that people don't think about. You have to watch if it just goes through your phone somewhere and it's not stored on your phone, you might be safe, but that has become a part of patient care today. With, you know, never share you know, configurations, passwords. I can think of many, many times where my vendors have actually done a favor to me and wrote the system administrator password on the front of the device, so that way any nurse could get in and change the configuration anytime they wanted to. You would think that this doesn't happen anymore. You know, still happens all the time. You know, ensuring proper access levels with users. You know, one of the things that, and I hate to say it, but a lot of people are, for lack of a better term, lazy, because in order to set up like even simple software for user access, it takes a lot of work to go through these pages of privileges and check this box, that box, this box. And sometimes, you know, they might just go, you know what, I'm just going to give them sysadmin because I don't have the time to sit there and go through all these pages of, you know, users. And then what happens is somebody accidentally gets somewhere they shouldn't have been because you've basically given them all open access. You know, we want, you know, no internet access, you know, limit access to the hospital network, create an exception list. I can't tell you, this is still a problem today. You know, if IT doesn't know not to touch our devices, and even if they do, you know, there's times that they will take out whole systems by doing a simple, not a malicious thing, but they just do a patch. Comes through, and if they miss it, you know, there's a lot of ramifications. Lock USB ports physically or by software. That's the biggest thing. Remember I said, so I can think of, you know, I used to be a JRAT, which was, we would go around as mock JCO inspectors, and I can't tell you the amount of times I found cell phones plugged into where they shouldn't have been. Oh, yep, let me go back. So we're using a lot, this company right here is out of Huntsville, Alabama. They're just one of the companies. They're a great company. I used to have some demo stuff used to carry around from them, but they're basically port lockers. What they will do is they'll create stuff for you, and specifically, so the IT can have their version of it. You can have your version of it with keys. They'll color code it. Yeah, all these slides are available. So, but you know, it's definitely, and they're real reasonably priced. You know, understanding your departments, you know, as we're working on IT, like I said, years ago, when we started this, even today, I have my certain people that I have my certain technicians in imaging that I really trust, you know, doing something. And also to remember, one of the things I'll talk about too is your ability to communicate. I've had some really smart people I've worked with throughout my career, but they cannot communicate to clinical staff. They cannot, their people skills, they're great engineers, but you know they are great engineers and you don't want to sometimes let them out into public. It is what it is, and it's something a lot, and it's not anything negative, it's just their personality. You know, they come and so your relationship with the IT provider, right now I've gotten better and better relationships with my current IT provider, you know, in my hospital. And actually because I was also part of IT because I was a biomed, so a lot of people remember me back in the day because I lived in the cubicle farm with them. So they remember me. Yeah, this is a big one right here. You know, who assigns and controls IP addresses? Like in our case for the PACS system, we have a group of people that the first thing what comes in, I got a new installation. Has anybody talked to connectivity? That's what their group's called, connectivity. That's the first red flag I raised because if I don't have an, you know, AE title, I don't have my IP addresses that are needed, this device goes nowhere. And getting a hold of them, you know, right off the bat, because even if a vendor assigns an IP address, it's not going to go on our network unless connectivity says it can. Meeting attendance, you know, find out routine IT planning meetings. You know, right now, I jumped into cybersecurity right off the bat, you know, for a long time ago, because a lot of people, you know, it just floated in the biomed world, you know, imaging world, it floated above their head. Somebody else is doing it, but it directly affected us. I started attending meetings on my own. If I heard of something going on, I go to my boss and say, hey, I got this notification through Facebook or through an email. Do you mind if I attend the cybersecurity meeting? You know, like, you know, just to learn about it. And then you come back and all of a sudden it's the IT department goes, hey, he speaks the same language as us. He understands what we're talking about. And, you know, get engaged, especially, you know, I can't, you know, everyone knows this IT security is getting more and more important. This is going to be the paramount thing for, you know, it's anybody who stays in this profession or starting this profession, it's those computer skills that are going to be paramount. Process of requesting IT support is a formal process, like in the different companies I've worked for, there's different processes. Is your vendor internal, external? Do they have to contract with people? And this is not meant to bash IT, but how many people know what a P1 call for biomed, priority 1 call for biomed, how many minutes do they expect you to call back? Held up one finger, 1 minute. Yeah, they expect you to be, you know, I want you on the phone now. I wouldn't call you if it wasn't important. You put in a request, you know, calling IT to begin with. I made that joke. I even called through my own hospital and I've been on hold for an hour. Your call is very important to us. Please wait while you know, you're listening to the elevator music. Well, yep, your next up queue. And so, but then when that call gets assigned, it can be anywhere from an hour to 4 hours on a priority 1 call. Like if my computer's not working, unless I say I am business critical, that's hours and hours and hours and hours for getting stuff done. You know, lead time for building interfaces, one of the biggest things right here at number 4. and this was kind of an eye-opener, like, as we're talking about the connectivity people. At my prior place, we were buying, like everyone's doing now today, is buying practice acquisitions. Everyone's folding backwards to hospitals, where they all went away at one point. The lead time at my old hospital to build an interface to basically, from a new practice was 4 to 6 months. So they would come to us and they'd say, how quick can you determine if the equipment's any good, it's calibrated, this stuff's good to go? We'd be like, we're done. 24, 48 hours, we're done. X-ray systems, everything, we can tell if it's done or not. How long does it take to get all that stuff to transmit somewhere? Especially, back in the day before Wi-Fi, in some of these areas, if you don't have Wi-Fi, you just can't get there from here. There's a lot of things that have to be basically built, a whole new, I think of some of the last practice acquisitions I did where we took down the network that they had there, completely got thrown away and it got replaced by our network, all the hardware, everything. And so that's one of the things, like, does IT create their own separate budgets? As we've been doing some of these, a lot of people will make an assumption because it works now, it's going to work on our stuff. And that can be, depending on how the intricacy of the system, that can be a few $1,000s to a lot more than that. Security software licenses. I know back in the day, it's not as much as it used to be to virtuality, but physically, remember that old certificate you got from Microsoft that said your license number is blah, blah, blah for your software? Back in the day, GE, if you lost your documentation for your software, you essentially had to buy new software because you had no way of proving it was yours. And that even on trade-ins, they wouldn't look back and say, yeah, we know who you are, and we'll just, out of the goodness of our heart, we'll give you the trade-in and upgrade. Storage areas, everything that you have, like, in your shop that's obvious. You don't want people walking in unannounced. Backup copies. I had just recently, we had one of our Nuke Med cameras that somebody actually took one of the dongles off. And as far as we can tell, just threw it away. And unfortunately, that dongle happened to be $25,000 to replace. And so everybody pointed at who, didn't matter who did it. What mattered is it didn't exist. It was absolutely useless anywhere else in the world. If you plugged it into a laptop, was there any HIPAA data on it? No. There's a software to run a, Nuke Med camera. So, but $25,000. And now we do have, there was, in a lot of the systems, they did have backups. Like, this one for some reason didn't have one. They had one internal, and they used to have one that they kept inside the CPU frame or kept it somewhere else secure. Document as many network relationships as possible. The more you know about your equipment, the better off you are. Remember I said that merge problem? If I understand how this stuff transmits, then you don't end up in one of these pointing fingers at each other to say, it's not my problem. And every time that you tell a computer person it's the network, they always point back at you. It's never the network never fails. Any of you IT? I don't feel any knives coming at me, so okay. Specifications of writing operating software. We're doing a whole new thing coming up right now with one of our vendors, Philips, that we're actually going to have the ability to see all the OS operating systems in all of our systems. There's only a couple of us. We're number 2 in the country. Duke's doing it already. They're ahead of us, but ours is really showing some promise. And so operating software, that was one of the things that cybersecurity came to us and said, hey, what's your operating software on all your devices? And does everyone remember XP? Did anyone know there was a, did everyone know there was a little piece called XP embedded, which became a nightmare because XP was such a great software that people would take pieces of it and put it inside their systems. And then people found out they could breach the systems. They didn't need to worry about it being XP. It had XP components in it, and they could breach systems by just knowing how to breach XP itself. So, so the beauty of, like I said, that was, I think, back in the day, I loved Windows XP. I mean, I considered it for years one, like, remember I mentioned that, that SDN network? XP was great. Unfortunately, if you have software that works great, also too, you don't buy new software. I hate to term it that way, but now we're on a cycle of Windows 95, Windows 7. Everyone knows what happened to Windows 8. It flamed out before it even got going. As we keep Rosewood 8 or 9. But now we're up to 11. 10. I mean, this is kind of if we're talking about revisions, I know ServiceNow does tours of the world. We're in Pakistan. We're in they're going by alphabet, and I'm thinking I'm just waiting for this to come back around until they hit Marietta, then they hit Tower Street. So I know that their revision is outside my door. But the revisions keep happening so quickly that I can think of and I'm not bashing ServiceNow or anything, but a lot of these companies will go, we release updates every, on the IT world, we release them every, say 60 days, 90 days. And once you get so far down the path, 2 or 3 updates, they start saying, we're not going to support you anymore because back in the old days, some people would support their software 10 years past. If I can think of a database company that supported they would not per se support it, but they'd still answer questions on their DOS system. Because they would go like, you bought it outright. If we have somebody around who understands it, we'll still answer your questions. You're not going to find anybody at Microsoft that goes, hey, I got a problem with DOS. What version? Oh, the last century? And you can hear the laughter over the phone because they'll be like, I wasn't even born then. So, hospital, remote access. We had a doctor years ago. Against my better judgment, we let the one doctor have remote access from his office practice. And unfortunately, the doctor would let his kid play on his computer. So guess what happened when it's obvious what happened? He got out to our network and started playing video games on our network, which wreaked all sorts of havoc to us. Which once it got pointed out, the doctor, wasn't too happy about. It became a little bit of an issue. HIPAA, everybody knows about this. Control of hard drives. Who owns the computers? Used for remote access. We have PACS reading stations that go out all the time. They're built in actually right next to my shop. We have back in the day, the PACS people lived right with me before I took my job. So they still build a lot of the remote reading stations in an area. They've still got an IT computer lab and stuff like that. So the doctors will come in and get their whole setup to bring the reading stations home with their, anybody know what a barcode monitor, you've heard of those back? These are like you went from the computer display that's a couple $100 to $10,000 for a couple displays because of the high resolution. Purchase, one of the things when we started getting into this, any vendor I dealt with, I tried to figure out what test equipment they were using, what software, anything. And depending on who I worked for, some of them were very forward thinking and said, no problem, but we're going to add this to the capital budget to make sure you have everything that you can do, to test just like the vendor. Allowing others to use, like one of the things when we're talking about in-house testing, we created at one of my places, Erlanger, we created a test area, patient monitor test area, where we actually had monitor surveillance, things like that. And what we also did, we could turn it into a clinical test station so they could train nurses on how to use the patient monitors, how the central stations worked, and they could so they were actually watching their own patients, but they were watching them from several floors away, and then you could take the nurse away from her clinical duties. You know, processes for copies of software. If you can reuse as you're doing projects, this is getting harder and harder. If you can reuse stuff to save cost, great. If you can't, or there's a saying I had, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And so you need to think long term. If you can use it today, will it still be relevant 5 years from now? And if the answer is I don't think so, don't do it. Remember I was talking about that area right there? There it is. All this stuff right here was basically when we did deinstalls, we salvaged all that stuff from our other deinstalls. And basically all this was put together as a, as you can see, we've got all of our biomed stuff sitting up here. You know, this was put together for, I think, probably 500 bucks. And we could see our whole network through SolarWinds. We could see our whole patient monitor network. You know, if somebody got a call, they could walk right from our shop right down to, this was our library back in the day. Now, the next person who took over for me didn't see the value in having that ability to look at stuff. It was in our library, and he decided what's more important if you're a manager, you need to have the biggest office possible, which that's another thing I kind of go like, yeah. So that, you know, so that was ideal back in the day. You know, common pitfalls of ending up supporting IT the wrong way. You know, supporting devices which are not directly connected to a patient or providing support to anything, physiological systems. You know, you don't want to delve into worlds you're not, you know, supporting roles. One of the things that, the bad thing that happens right now, how easy is it for you to get an FTE? For me, it's impossible right now. You know, I'm running a skeleton crew. I would love to have a couple more FTEs. I know right now with us just buying this whole hospital network in Augusta, I'm not even gonna ask, not for a while until I can build a good business case for it. So if I start adding, you know, support roles, or if I wanna get outside of my lane, I'm gonna have to do it with my existing staff, which makes your, you know, your staff satisfaction goes like down the toilet. You know, anything you do outside your skill set, never assume you can find the perfect, you know, right now, how many people have people beating on their door to become, you know, work for you? I actually have been a little fortunate because I've got, I've had like two, you know, vendors who have come to me as they're hitting their sunset of their career that would like to end their career with their current vendor and come to work for me, because I just hired the primary care stream technician out of Metro Atlanta, came to work for me because number one, you're not on call. You know, number two, your hours are set. And as he put it, I put you on 410s. Currently, you know, we have a lot of contracts. As he looked at it, just coming to work for me, he gained 52 vacation days a year. And that went to all of his friends in the field engineers who are being run over. You know, instead of being in one state, they're in 4 states going now. You mean you can go home at night and the chances of Greg calling you are 0. So, you know, but you can't find new employees today. You know, our profession, you know, they're talking 40, 50%, you know, of the people. How many people in here are over 40? Come on, guys, let's just do it. Let's go 50. Let's go 60. How many people are 20? 1. How many people are 30? Couple. 40. Okay, so you see right now, we're pretty much the demographic of the profession right here. If half of us don't want to hang around for the next 10 years, it's pretty obvious why. You know, we're you know, we're saying we're the gray hairs anymore. I do have gray hair, you know, stop, not by choice. I said that's because I became a manager at one point and my hair color changed. It has nothing to do with my age. But that's the problem we're having right now, is who's going to backfeed us. So when we're talking here, Solar winds, watch for good opportunities. This is something we got ourselves into. And basically what happened was, it was a major project I was doing, and our IT department came and said, we'd like to get this software called Solar Winds. And we funded it out of my telemetry project. My techs were livid. They said, you gave this away to them. And I said, no, I don't think you understand. They want this for their network. When they realize that they have to watch our stuff, they're going to turn around and say, that's your problem. I said, just be patient. Just wait your time. Lo and behold, 90 days later, guess what happened? We want nothing to do with these patient monitors. We got our stuff, and we had that. Remember I said that biomed specialist? He built the world's greatest map of our patient monitoring system that we had at Erlanger. You could look out IP addresses, everything. You could tell who was online, who was offline. We had, beauty of that was we had 2 separate mirror networks. So if one side of our building went down, we had a whole, all we had to do was jump the back and hardwire patch cables to the other network jack. We were, unless the whole building went black, you can never take out our complete patient monitor network. The purpose of the equipment being replaced, as we're talking about planning, is anyone involved with clinical staff? I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a project and nobody's ever talked to the user. They've just come up with, we're going to buy this. And if you ever, I can think of my past employer, we were replacing patient monitors, and guess what? My whole group of nurses at my area, we were a big hospital network, had absolutely no say-so in what was being bought. They didn't even get to see them. They were livid because a bunch of people outside of their world up in, another city, Flint, Michigan, up above them, were going like, here's what we're going to buy. And they're like, we don't want that. And, when they came to me originally, I said, yeah, I plan on running a clinical trial, because each one of the hospitals should run a clinical trial, get all the feedback from all of our clinical staff, and say, our decision is this because of why. And it should be, a decision made on facts. If you don't involve the end user, things go wrong. Support requirements, what's the budget for all the equipment and ongoing support? How many people don't consider what it costs to run something long term? If you put, a simple thing, rule of thumb back in the day, if you had a new, I'll pick on an MRI. I think we used to throw like, if you had to go full vendor support on this thing, you're probably looking 18%, 15, 18% full service contract. You don't touch it. As you went down, everyone remember Pat Lynch? Cost to service ratio. Anybody remember Dave Dickey? I actually worked for him. That was, but we won't, everyone makes weird career steps. That was mine. But part of our thing back in the day was we had corporate cost to service ratio, and our corporate number the last time was a little over 5%. So if you were higher than 5%, you were on the bad side of getting a raise. I was running my group at 4.85. So my group got the raise, but the other thing that was bad, it kind of hurt, was I had a little better demographic of people, where I felt bad for the guy who was just over in Pontiac, Michigan, because if you're ever been, anybody from Michigan, or, you guys are pretty close to the Midwest, Metro Detroit at one, has pockets that were just devastated. And you could have a hospital that's doing great, like Macomb, that we're doing okay. Go 15 miles down the road in Pontiac, Michigan, and it's like Pontiac is just nothing. It's indigent care, there's no money, and that kind of hurt them. Data storage needs. Do you need to store stuff? I remember, system administrators, but anyways, on the data storage side, unfortunately, one of the best programs, I ever saw, we basically had the ability to store patients' vital signs. It's called Excel Medical. Anybody ever heard of that? The company went basically, it got absorbed and became no more, but they had the ability to store beat-to-beat resolution for patient data. And if you think about it, and archive it for, like, if you had a heart attack, they could, the moment you hit the emergency room, they put a monitor on you. If you had a, like a PDM, patient data module for GE, that kept the data going. Literally, you could watch pre-op, arrival, post-op, recovery, everything, all the beat-to-beat data was in that system. Bad news is it took a lot of memory and a lot of storage to keep all this stuff. And they decided back in the day, like, it's a shame that, the company didn't, it's more than one great idea that fell to the wayside of people, thinking dollars, versus patient care. System administrators, how many times have you been brought into a, any project, IT especially wise, they don't even know who's going to run it. Right now we at Wellstar, we have a process where everything goes through a board on IT. So they have a whole, and remember I said about that whole time, we respond quickly, they respond. If they need something done, it goes through their approval process, which is not days. It is, potentially weeks. All the technology you're buying, one of the biggest things that still happens is somebody will sell you, when you're thinking of the technology curve, somebody will sell you something that's at, like we're talking Windows 10, Windows 11. If they know Windows 10 is going out of support a year or so, 18 months from now, and they can get you to buy that system, and you don't, and somebody doesn't realize it, they've made their sale, but all of a sudden 18, when it's out, now you've got to do some upgrades to it. So you did get a fantastic deal, but long term, you didn't really make out. Leftover equipment, remember I showed you that lab? I still look for that all the time. We salvage, as I talked about that Atlanta Medical Center. We went down and we, different devices that we had that we know that we're still using, anything that we needed to support our devices, we took it in our shop, dismantled it, stripped it to components, threw the carcasses away. So we've got enough, I've got probes, I've got, CPUs, I've got everything from wheels, the stuff to salvage that can reuse to keep me going on some of this stuff for, potentially a year or more. Keep going back to this, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Make sure every decision you make has a firm foundation behind it. Budgets, talked about this, components, over the years, I can think of one of the worst fights I had with my IT department many years ago was Nortel versus Cisco. We were a Nortel show site at my hospital, and the system I was installing was Cisco. It was qualified through the FDA with Cisco equipment. So we went in a tit for tat because they wanted to change it all over. And I said, we can't do that because the system is, through back in that day, the FDA qualifications were done with those components. If you, in modern day, everyone knows if you modify a system, you essentially become the owner of it. Back in the day, how many people would go out to Newark and buy components? This is the this component, I can replace it on a board. I know we rebuilt power supplies and modified them. That's something that's, you can't even do that today. Future plans for, how, for upgrades, the operating system. Back in my day, I was a big fan of Evergreen. I'm still trying to sway my bosses to that way. I like having systems when I put something in, a plan for if the life of the system is 7 years, that's another thing we're talking about. We had Philips monitors running 15 years that we deinstalled them that were running great. There is no chance that anything's going to be running 15 years, whether it's imaging or patient monitoring, without being touched. Probably 7 years now is probably what you're looking at. 7 to 10 years. So what's the plan if you need to keep doing these upgrades? I like evergreens. remediation, software conflict issues, annual support costs. A lot of people don't realize that just because you buy it, it doesn't mean that's the end of it. You have to have some sort of budget to maintain it. License costs, this is another thing that comes, I can think of in a couple of the ITs. In fact, I don't want to sound like I'm picking on GE, but you know, if you wanted to expand with GE, I remember that was a challenge because when they moved it off to Europe, Europe moves a little differently sometimes in America. And I remember I had to get some licenses from Europe, and I've got a daughter that actually lives in Germany right now. Her husband's a German engineer for Porsche, but they have a thing called holidays in Europe. That's a foreign concept to Americans. So when Europeans go on holiday, their job goes with them. And I remember I needed some software licenses, and they said, you know what? He'll be back next week. And you're going, like, in America with this fly? No. And how much does it cost? Time frame. You know, how do you document patient data removal? Medical device CPUs uniquely identified. We had this issue when we were shutting down Atlanta Medical Center. People came through, and this is not bashing just you know, the IT people, WellStarts. Everywhere you go, they hire. You can get IT people anywhere, and they look at a box, and all these boxes look the same to them. And if you don't tell them that this box runs is the CPU for a CT system, and you tell them in that case, like we had at that place, they went through and grabbed every CPU and took it for destruction. Well, guess what happens if you take the CPU for a CT? What did you just turn the CT into? Junk. So we had a few issues with stuff like that and I had that even on a telemetry system. They came through and were labeling all my CPUs as theirs. And it's like, and so I created actually a sticker on it that, you know, it's long, I haven't used it in years, so I don't have a copy of it, but everything said this is a medical device. Clearly fine, so don't touch this. You know, tools for spectrum analyzers. We know right now we can use our phones now as spectrum analyzers. You know, this is some of the stuff we are getting I'm budgeting for right now. When I said, know what your equipment is, and what we went out to one of our vendors and said, what are you using to troubleshoot networks today? And he came up with his Fluke analyzer. And when I remember, I said I hired that guy from Carestream. He goes, yeah, that's what we're using too. And I said, well, you know what? Next year, that's what we're budgeting for. We're budgeting for $8,000 for that analyzer, because you know what? Every other vendor is using the same Fluke analyzer, and we don't have one. Site surveys. If you're in the first presentation, you talked about looking on your phone and having, you know, your best signal strength. Unfortunately, right here, I'm gonna have to, because we had a little problem with compression getting this one over. In this slide, if anybody wants to see it, I had a spectrum survey done for our new telemetry system in downtown Chattanooga. And what happened was we had all these Wi-Fi systems come up. And what happened was nobody thought it was there. And on the same frequency we were going to use, the haunted house that was directly across the street was using the same Wi-Fi spectrum that we were. So what I'm saying about, you know, who else is functioning in the area? Know who it is. Let's see. Am I still good for time, or how close am I over?
A little over, but.
Okay. All right. Locate challenging areas. Oh, here's my babies. Beauty and the Beast. Guess which one's mine? Yep. The one on the right is IT. That's what you want to strive for. Right there. Everything's labeled. You know, you could walk in there and do any troubleshooting. ports this right there. Boom. You know, one of the things I had on another slide was you're going through blueprints or somebody's trying to install something, make sure that you can get, like I mentioned in my prior presentation, we had a building called the 3800 building, which if you're in that one, you know what that means. Anyone there? It was built in 1938. So you can imagine what the computer network was for that. So anytime we had to pull things through, you know, I ended up occasionally working outside my wheelhouse with like cell phone vendors and stuff like that, because they go, no problem. I'm used to dealing with places like this that are only less than 20 years old. When you're dealing with stuff that's a century old, you can't get there from here. So anyways, well, thank you for attending, and all these are available. I've got some better, you know, if I get the other presentation, these guys make all of them available. So if I can pop those other slides in something else, they're you know, they're a little dated, but they are so, for lack of eye-opening, that when you go out someplace and you know, do a site survey, you'd be amazed. It's just like, if you think about it, if you live in a neighborhood, how many times you've been able to go out and pirate your neighbor's Wi-Fi back in the day? What network can I connect to? You know, I lived in one point, Metro Detroit. 3 of my neighbors were unencrypted. So, you know, you didn't want to have Wi-Fi. I'm not that type of person, but it'd be like, wow, this is hilarious. If one of my kids was here, guess what? They're going to be out on their Wi-Fi, not mine, because they don't want to get caught.